Hey guys, this is Charles Jaeger with Metal. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create some double exposure displacement mapping effects like those seen in the True Detective title sequence. Now this can be done on videos or photos, so let's go ahead and preview the effect. If you don't already know, Metal Freeform Pro was used in the True Detective title sequence, and they have a nice blog post about it you can find on their website. Before we get started, I do want to mention you can download a free demo of Freeform Pro from aescripts.com. And I've also included a free project file with a few sample scenes, and you can download that from Aescripts as well. Check for the link in the description. Alright guys, this is a really fun tutorial, so let's just get started. The first scene I want to take a look at and recreate is this scene here. It's a double exposure effect. And this is really similar to the ones that were in the True Detective title sequence. But you can see we have some fire over the portrait face here. And you can see how the face is kind of being subtly displaced. You can kind of see at the eye here how that's displacing based on the actual fire footage. And that's where Freeform Pro comes into play for that effect. You can also notice it here on the ear on the side there. I'll go ahead and RAM preview this. But that's a nice accenting effect, and it's much more effective than just doing a regular double exposure because the displacement definitely adds that extra bit to it. So let's go ahead and recreate this shot. First thing we need to do is create a new composition. I'm just going to have this be 1920 by 1080, and I'm just going to call this New Fire Scene, and go ahead and click OK. And the first thing I need is going to be my portrait image. So I'm just going to drag in the portrait image I've got. And you can see it's quite a bit bigger than our composition, so I'm going to go ahead and resize this down to the size that I want. And I'm also going to go ahead and drag in the footage of the fire as well. So I have some slow motion fire, I'll just drag and drop that in as well. I'll close both of these up. So if we zoom in and look at this fire footage, you can see it's slow motion footage. This was shot at 180 frames per second. And then on top of that, it was slowed down even more with a pixel blending effect. You can either do this natively in After Effects, or you can use a plugin like Twixtor to slow down the footage even more. Now, the other thing I want to note is that our portrait image here, if I drag it above the fire footage, this is what's going to actually be displaced by the fire footage. And you're going to see that this and the footage are two different sizes. And really, what I highly recommend is whatever footage you're working with or image you're going to displace, having them both be the same size resolution is going to make our workflow much easier. And this can be easily resolved by just taking our portrait image here, and we're just going to go ahead and pre-compose that. So I'm going to select it and go to Layer, and then Pre-compose. And I'll just call this Image. And make sure you have all attributes have moved into a new composition, and then click OK. So now you can see we've pre-composed this to be 1920 by 1080, and that matches our fire footage. And this also allows us to do some more unique things as well. So I can come into the image comp, and I can actually keyframe a little bit of movement onto this. So I'm going to hit P on the keyboard for position. I'll just create a keyframe there. I'll move down here about 5 seconds. And I'll just go ahead and move this over just a little bit, just to add a little bit extra dynamic movement to this. And when we come back out here to our main composition, we can see if we go ahead and scroll through this, we have just a little bit of extra movement, just to make it a little more interesting. So now on that image composition, let's go ahead and apply Metal Freeform Pro. So with it selected, come here to Effect. We're going to come down here to Metal and select Metal Freeform Pro. And when we apply that, you're going to see the display grid will appear. We can go ahead and check that off. Now the two main settings we're going to be looking at are going to be displacement mapping and the contour. So under displacement mapping, we're going to have the option for displacement layer. You go ahead and select this, and I'm going to select that slow motion fire. And when we select it, we're really not going to see much of a difference just yet. We need to increase the displacement height. So I'll go ahead and increase this some. I like to set it on a setting of around 200. And this may be a little difficult to see as is right now, but I go ahead and scroll through the footage. You can see we're kind of getting some of those like heat waves on our footage, and that's where it's actually being displaced. Now I'm actually going to increase the displacement height to 400 because I really want to exaggerate this to show you a few different things that are happening. So as I increase that, let's zoom in on our footage. And if I go ahead and scroll through on this, you're going to see that some of the displacement is a little bit jagged, almost as if it's like low poly or too too much movement going on for the tessellation we have on our image. And you can see, really notice this on the ear, you kind of get these like jagged, sharp edges. And that really doesn't look very appealing for what we want to create. There's a very easy way we can resolve this built into Metal Freeform Pro. Now, as I mentioned, the tessellation, we can go ahead and check this down. And this basically just acts as how detailed our mesh is that's being displaced. But we can go ahead and turn on adaptive, and that'll actually adapt to our footage and will increase and decrease the mesh size based on what's happening. And you can see when I check that, it looks a little bit better, but it still has some edging and stuff that doesn't look quite right. You can see the way it's kind of pixel mapping there. Some of it looks just a little too extreme. And the way we're going to dial this back down is with the contour. So what this basically does is it applies a blur to the displacement or also our texture layer if we want to. I can go ahead and I have it set on both right now. And as I increase this, you're going to see it's going to blur, and it's really going to dial down kind of those jagged movements and displacement that we may not want. Now I don't want to blur both of them, so I'm going to bring this back down, and I just want to select my displacement layer. So as I increase this, watch how this acts to our displacement. You can see how it smooths everything out really quickly. I usually set this on something like 50. I find that's kind of a nice medium there. So let's go ahead and RAM preview this and check out the displacement. So now you can see we're getting some nice smooth kind of heat mapping movement on top of our image. It looks a lot more appealing for this particular shot. So now we have a few options on however we want to kind of create the double exposure look. I could select this fire footage, I could Control D or Command D on the Mac to duplicate it. If I wanted to, I could place it above my image. If I wanted to, I could set this on a different blending mode. Really, whatever you want is your choice. I'm going to set this to screen. You can see we get a decent effect here. It's a little bit difficult to see the face behind everything that's going on, but you can see how it kind of maps with the footage and the displacement. You kind of notice that on the ear right there. Let me show you the technique I actually did with the original composition I created. I'm going to go ahead and delete that fire footage that I duplicated. And what I want to do is I'm going to right click, I'm going to do a new adjustment layer. And on this, I'm just going to apply the effect tint. So under color correction, I'm going to select tint. That's going to make this black and white. And then with my slow motion fire footage here at the bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to track matte. If you don't see this, you can press F4 on the keyboard to toggle the switches there. And I'm going to select this to be a Luma matte. And now we can kind of subtly see the fire appearing through the face. And you can see how that actually displaces things. So that looks pretty cool. And the branches here in the shot kind of look like veins almost. So I think that works really well with this face. And then what I did on the original scene to add a little bit more depth was I added in some fire ember footage that I have. So I'm gonna come back over here to the project, and under footage, I've got this fire embers overlay. I'll just drag and drop that in, and I set this to be a screen blending mode. And you can see it just adds a little touch of orange, and those embers kind of coming up match well with that flame footage. And that's really all there is to it to create this double exposure displacement mapping effect. This is kind of the core premise that we're going to be using throughout this tutorial. So let's go ahead and break down another one of these scenes that I created here. So I'm going to go to this ocean scene. And what I've got here is a portrait image pre-composed, just as we did on the last shot. And what I've got is Metal Freeform Pro applied to it. And the layer that I'm using for the displacement is this shot of this ocean footage here. So we have these waves coming in, and we have this dark blue of the waves, and you can see how they crest here with the white. And so it gives us some nice contrast that'll work well for displacing this on footage. And so if we go ahead and turn back on the image, we can actually see this displacement taking place on our footage. If I go ahead and scroll through here, you can see there's where the wave is kind of cresting up. It kind of creates this wave on top of the footage. It looks a little odd as is, but what I did was I took that original footage and I just overlaid it on top of the image. I'm going to set this to a multiply blending mode. And when I do that, now we can see the ocean kind of coming through, and you'll see it kind of match perfectly with the displacement on the other image that we're using with Freeform Pro. Let's go ahead and take a look at this other water scene that I've got here. And so you can see I have this stock footage here of just some kind of caustics from a pool, it looks like. And this is going to work really well to create some displacement from. So what I did for this particular scene was with the footage, I just applied a tint effect and then a levels effect to add more contrast onto that. And then I've got an image here. I'll go ahead and turn off that stock clip just of this face, and I'm using Metal Freeform Pro on the face, and I'm mapping the displacement layer that we just looked at with this ocean water here. And you can see if I go ahead and just scroll through this slowly, you'll see the displacement taking place. I'll zoom in here, and you can see at the eye right here, the wave kind of goes over, so we can see those kind of caustic lines on this image. Now, as it looks right now, it looks a little bit odd. You can't really tell what's happening. So what I did was with this footage, I went ahead and set it to an overlay blending mode. So I'll just come up here and select overlay. Now we can kind of see those waves. And just to make this kind of look a little bit more like it's underwater, I added an adjustment layer with a tint effect. Go ahead and turn that on. You can see it kind of gives it this teal look. So now we can see those caustic waves and how they're kind of displacing our image. And it looks pretty cool. Kind of a nice combination of everything there. All right, so jumping over to two other example scenes I want to show you. These are portraits. They kind of have a custom depth pass that I created. So you can see we have a portrait image here. I can go ahead and rotate the camera. You can see we get this nice kind of parallax effect with the background image and the actual face itself. I'll go ahead and solo that. You'll see it kind of has a little bit of a 3D perspective on it as well. And I'm creating that deformation and displacement mapping with Metal Freeform Pro. So let's jump over to this other example I've got here. So you can see on the actual image here, I have Freeform Pro applied to it. And again, I'll go ahead and just solo this and rotate around so you can see a little bit of that parallaxing effect that's happening. Obviously, if we move over too far, it kind of breaks the effect because it's kind of a low poly mesh, but we just need a little bit here to create kind of a subtle parallax, almost looks like slow motion footage. And so we can actually use a real camera rotation with a background there to kind of create realistic parallax. But let's take a look at this depth pass that I created. And I kind of want to break this down really quickly and just kind of explain how I created it. So if we jump into this depth pass composition, you can see we have different layers here. And what these are just white solids. And I have them set at various opacity levels. And I went in here with the original image. I'll go ahead and turn that on. You can see how that looks. And I just created a mask around this. And you can see with each one of these, I'll go ahead and click through this. And that's what I'm using to create my displacement, or almost like a Z-depth pass for this particular image. And parts of the image like the nose, which are going to be the closest to the camera, those are going to be brighter. And then parts that are further back, like the body back here, it's just going to be a much darker color. And then obviously the farthest background is going to be totally black. So that's what I'm using for the displacement. So let's jump back over to the first portrait I created here with depth. And I'll just kind of break down how I created the double exposure effect that's taking place. So again, if I go ahead and rotate this with the camera, you can see we have a little bit of displacement occurring on the face, but I'm going to jump actually over to a custom camera view. And I'll go ahead and turn back on the background here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off this Luma matte. And so as I rotate around this, we're going to see the background of this image is black, so it's a little difficult to see, but I have another image back there you can see floating, and it's just been pushed back further in Z space. So when we rotate this, we're going to get a natural looking parallax effect. So let's jump back over to the active camera. In order for that to kind of shine through the face, we're going to do the same Luma matte trick we did before. So with the image below our portrait image here with Freeform Pro applied to it, I'm going to select it and I'm going to change this to be a Luma matte. So now we can see that map image directly through the face. But again, when we rotate this with a 3D camera, because it's further back in Z space, we get a nice kind of cool parallax effect happening, as well as a little bit of parallax with the actual face, because we actually added some depth onto it as well using Metal Freeform Pro. Finally, the other method you could use to create some of these double exposure displacement mapping effects would be to actually use footage shot on a green screen. So let's jump over to this scene. Now, footage shot on a green screen, depending on what you're working with, may not always be possible. It's going to give you the most options, but it's also going to add a little bit more complexity to the shot just because you're going to have so many different variables that you can work with. So if you're really looking to customize your double exposure look, filming a person on a green screen will probably be your best option because that's going to allow us to isolate them from the background and we can work with that independently. But let me go ahead and create a simplified version of this shot here just so you can kind of see the process. So I'm going to jump back over here to my project panel. So what I've got is some footage here. I'll show you the original footage shot on a green screen. So you can see this is just on a portable green screen. In order to simplify my workflow, I just went ahead and masked out around this and went ahead and keyed that out and rendered out a pass just on an alpha channel. So I'll double click on this and you can see I've got this green screen shot. And it's a little bit closer up, and again, it has an alpha channel. And this is a PNG sequence. But again, having this already be pre-keyed means I'm not going to have to keep rendering that effect, and it's just going to make working with it a little bit easier. So I'm going to create a new composition here. I'll just call this new green screen shot. And I'll go ahead and click OK. So I'm going to drag in that PNG sequence. And what I want to do first is I want to create two different copies of this. I'm going to hit Control-D or Command-D on a Mac. And one of these I'm going to use as my footage layer, and the other one I'm going to use as my displacement. So on this top copy, I'm going to go ahead and pre-compose that one. So Layer, Pre-compose, and we'll just call this Footage. and move all attributes into a new composition and click OK. And on this bottom copy, pre-compose, and we'll just call this displace. And click OK. I'm also going to change the color of the displacement one just so I can recognize it as being a little different. So now let me go ahead and bring in one of my background images. So I'm going to come here to images, and I'm going to select this image with the fog and drag and drop that in. Go ahead and scale this down a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and close these up just to simplify this. And again, we want to go ahead and pre-compose this background so it's the same size as whatever footage we're going to be working with. So I'm just going to select my background here and go to layer and pre-compose that as well. We'll just call this BG for background and move all attributes into new composition and select OK. Now I'm going to move the background in between the footage and the displacement. I'm going to turn the footage off now for the time being. And on the backgrounds, we're going to apply Metal Freeform Pro. So with it selected, come over to Effect. We're going to come down here to Metal and select Freeform Pro. And we go ahead and turn off the display grid. And let's go ahead and navigate to Displacement Mapping and Contour. And for the displacement mapping, I'm going to select my displacement layer, which is Displace. And let's go ahead and increase the displacement height here to 400 again, just so we can see this a little bit easier. Usually I use something like 200. Now we can see the footage has been displaced a little bit. Let's go ahead and scroll through this. And it's done two different things here. So we're seeing the displacement on the actual background here, kind of in our cutout, and that's what we want. But you'll notice that the edges here have also been displaced because of all the displacement that's going on. And that's going to be a pretty easy fix we can use with some matting, but also just to kind of smooth things out, let's go over to the contour, and I'm going to select this to be a displacement map. Just for the pre-blur layer, I'm going to set this to be 50. Again, just kind of smoothing that out. So we see a little bit of subtle displacement happening. You can see on the trees there based on our original footage. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead to this footage here. I'm actually going to duplicate that as well. And with the background on this footage copy that's just above it, I'm going to select the background layer, and I'm going to select this to be an alpha matte. So you can see when we select that, it's just going to clean up those edges around here, and we still have our alpha channel preserved. And because we have this broken down into so many different variable pieces, we have a lot more options we can do. So with the background here, I could create my own custom background now. So I'll just do a new solid, and I'll make this be kind of a light colored blue solid. And I'll just say make comp size and click OK. And I can place this in the background here, but you can see now we can change the color of this backdrop to be anything we want. And I might even come back over here and I might select under the images one of these grunge textures I've got and just place that above it. Maybe set this to be an overlay blending mode or something. You can see just add some more texture to it. And if you really want to, you could also scale this, so I could add some different things animating at the same time. So with the grunge texture here, I'm going to hit S on the keyboard for scale, and I'll just move down here about 5 seconds or so, and we'll go ahead and scale this up a little bit, just add some movement. And we can do the same thing on our background. So if we come back over to our background composition, I might come in here and I might do some scaling here with this. Go ahead and create a keyframe. I might scale this the other direction. And then we could also add in various grunge textures in here and animate those as well. That's something they did quite a bit on the True Detective title sequence. So I'm just going to select this paper texture I've got over here, drag and drop it in, and I'm going to set this to be a screen blending mode. And it's a little difficult to see that, so I might come up here to Effect and add a curves effect onto this and just increase the contrast a little bit. So we can see those little specks here all over the footage. And let's go ahead and keyframe the scale of that as well. So I'll hit S on the keyboard for scale, and we'll scale it in the opposite direction here. So now we're kind of creating this like depth effect going on, and that's only going to be on our background. So let's jump back over to our main composition here for this. We can scroll through and we kind of see now all the different pieces moving, how that kind of creates some cool depth on this shot. So now if we want to add that double exposure element to this, we can come back here to our other footage composition we have at the top, and I'll go ahead and turn that on. And what I'm going to do with this is apply a tint effect. So I'll just come up here with it selected to Effect, Color Correction, and Tint. And that'll make that black and white. And I'm going to go ahead and mask out part of this image that I want to kind of double expose over on top of our background. So I'll just select the pen tool here, and with Roto Bezier on, I'm just going to mask out kind of around the nose and mouth. So now we can kind of see what that looks like. I'm going to hit MM on the keyboard for the mask properties, and And I'm going to increase the feather here to something like 100. And as I move down here, I'm going to keyframe the mask path of this a little bit as well. So just move down in time a little bit, maybe to right here. And I'm going to go ahead and move the mask back into position. And so what we can do with that layer is I'm going to select it and I'm going to turn off the mask visibility here. And so what we can do is we can set this to be a screen blending mode. So now you can kind of see how that overlays, and we can go ahead and track through this, see what that looks like. And if it's still a little too apparent, what I would do is come in here and hit T on the keyboard and adjust the opacity, bring that down just a little bit, just so we can kind of see that it's overlaid on top of our footage. Lastly, if you're trying to match the True Detective look even more, you want to keep in mind that they did, again, use a lot of different textures they overlaid and animated as well. And so you can add in things kind of like vignettes and blurs, maybe some chromatic aberration. And another thing I did on my example was I did a rack focus where I kind of added a Gaussian blur over the cutout here and the background and just kind of rack focus those to create more depth on that shot. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial recreating some of the effects from the True Detective title sequence using Metal Freeform Pro. Don't forget you can download the free project file for this tutorial from AE Scripts. Again, check for the link in the description. This has been Charles Jaeger with Metal. Thanks for watching.